Welcome back. There is a big question mark around what is going to happen with First Nations child welfare reform. 1 week after a vote to reject a proposed $47.8 billion settlement. In fact, few are even willing to speak about it, turning down interview requests and only issuing statements. Our Truth in Politics panel is, however, willing to talk about the vote and what happens next. Jennifer Laewetz is a partner with Paskwâw Harbour Strategies. And helping us out this week is André Bear, a board member of the First Nations Child and Caring Society. Jennifer, André, thanks for being with us this week. Special thanks for helping out, André. We'll start with you as you spoke at the Special Chiefs Assembly last week, and mentioned that you thought the final settlement agreement continued discrimination against First Nations children. Maybe a little on that and your thoughts on the deal being rejected.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think all of our experts had agreed that if we accepted the deal as is, discrimination of our children would have continued for many reasons. And I highlighted a little bit in my speech, but I think it was clear that Ontario had a greater interest. They had more lobbying power because their lawyers were negotiating the deal. And so we've seen that their remoteness factors were potentially higher than other remoteness bans, and so that's great for Ontario and for their children, but this is the point of the agreement, is to end discrimination for all children, right? And so I really hope that Ontario has their own deal someday, but as for all the other regions across Canada, I think we need to find something that is more reflective of the needs of all of our children. And I think we need certainty when it comes to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal orders and having those orders become the floor, and then we negotiate up from there.
Jennifer, it's been a week since the vote. The National Chief hasn't spoken to media yet about this. Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu hasn't done any interviews. Seems to be a lot of questions about what happens next. What do you think has been going on over the past week, I guess?
I think there's been a lot of confusion over what happens next. I think it almost feels like the AFN and the government are just saying, well, you guys figure it out then. And it's like our chiefs and leadership across the country are being treated like they made the wrong mistake by the AFN and Canada because they were fighting for a better deal. And I think that was one of the biggest issues in the room, is that the chiefs and leadership just felt like they were not consulted on enough and that it was too urgent. That was one of the number one things I was hearing was, why the urgency? Why the urgency? Like, we know that this deal, has been coming off of a decision made in the makes of over 2 decades. Like, this is not a new thing. And on the stage, I heard the AFN lawyers say, this isn't new. We've been working at this for so long, for over 5 years. Well, then why the lack of consultation, and why now the urgency? We know that there's an ever-changing political climate, but why should that affect, at the end of the day, the services and the agreement that our children from CARE deserve?
André, both you and Jennifer were in the child welfare system. What do you think needs to happen to ensure First Nations children on reserve are no longer discriminated against in this system?
I think that if there's ever going to be a time in our history or in our future that we ever see statutory funding, I think this is the moment. I think this is the time where statutory funding is required to ensure that no First Nations children are discriminated against within the child welfare system. And I don't think that the number, it could have been $50 billion, it could have been $60 billion. But the point is, we need something that is certainty in law. And to me, that's statutory funding for First Nations children to ensure that discrimination of them never happens again.
Jennifer, what do you see politically happening here next? A lot was made of a possible election looming. There's clearly a divide amongst chiefs over this deal. What do you think is going to happen next?
You know what, I don't know. I know that there is obviously a lot of concern with the change of government potentially coming, and it is very unfortunate that as First Nations people, what happens at a federal level, even provincially, affects us. And it's like we have to bend over backwards to make these deals happen as quickly as possible and to work with the new incoming governments. And it's almost like starting relationships over again, even though it's supposed to be a nation-to-nation agreement with Canada. There are those political divides in there and those dynamics that we have to continuously work through. And it's frustrating. And I feel bad for our leadership that constantly have to deal with new people and lobbyists to even form these relationships and get things done.
André, you, like I said, had grown up in the child welfare system, and there was a lot of confusion, I think, made last week, or maybe on purpose or not, but that, you know, the $23 billion in compensation that is going to be going to children and their families who grew up in the system or were impacted, that money wasn't going to flow. Can you maybe straighten that out for us and confirm, you know, that's a different thing, that money is still, that program's moving forward?
Yeah, so I didn't grow up in the system. My mom was fortunate enough to sober up long enough to get me back, but I was in and out of care. However, the compensation is out the door. So the $23 billion that is for children that were discriminated against is going to come. That's already out the door. And I think there was a lot of fear mongering during the at the AFN saying that the compensation might be impacted, when in reality, it had nothing to do with the compensation that was already out the door. This was specific to long-term reform.
Jennifer, your thoughts on that? Do you think that there was this was maybe purposely done, making it seem as though there wasn't going to be any compensation for those in the child welfare system if this $47.8 billion deal was rejected?
I think so. I think there was a lot of urgency and fear mongering that was happening, and I think there was also the component of, you know, a lot of confusion as well. Like at one point I was standing there and the votes were done for the day, and there were chiefs standing around thinking like things were going to continue. There was a lot of confusion, and that was unfortunate. And I actually heard from a chief as we were walking out, he's like, I don't even know what just happened. And they're like, did we just vote that down? Like it was like there was so much confusion. And if I'm confused and everyone next to me is confused, that's a problem. And that tells me that not only were things confusing at the AFN assembly, but also everything leading up to it where there wasn't proper enough communication. And don't get me wrong, the AFN were hosting these, you know, long Zoom meetings, but it's still, at the end of the day, I sat on those Zoom meetings and I was still confused. There was a lot of confusion, and I think there was a lot of wording to place that responsibility back on the leadership, saying, you voted for this. You wanted to do this with the agenda. This is what you asked for. And it's almost like they were doing that to build their argument for themselves that they could fight back on this, and the leadership that called them out if they wanted to.
Jennifer, André, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks so much for being with us this week.
Thank you.